Woodblock printing and Sumi ink carry a long joint history since the arrival of Buddhism from China during the 6th century. Important holy sutras were among the first texts printed and circulated among the Japanese. Printing or stamping Buddhist images on paper with Sumi became also a religious ritual. Repeating the act intensified the prayer and fortified the powers of the image. Sumi ink has played an important role ever since in the history of visual and literary arts of Japan. It has been vital in transmitting and preserving all kinds of information. Japan enjoyed a long period of peace and stability during the Edo period. Woodblock printed media offered entertainment and excitement to the citizens in the form of true crime incidents and titillating gossips. Accidents, especially devastation by fire, earthquake, or violent death, interested the public as much as they do today. Newsletters also related heroic actions performed by ordinary men or cautions against mischiefs. Printed bulletins spreads the latest news fast in the cities. They sold well in the countryside too, where they were carried by traveling salesmen without much delay. The success of the bulletins was due to the high literacy rate among the Japanese, extending from the well-educated samurai class to modest farmers. There were mainly two types of woodblock printed newspapers in old Japan: the black and white Kawaraban and the multicolored Nishiki-e Shimbun. Kawaraban is a common name for cheap one-sheet news bulletins printed with Sumi ink. Their older name, Yomiuri, refers to the manner they were usually sold by hawkers in markets and street corners. The oldest surviving Kawaraban news bulletin describes the conquest of Osaka Castle by the shogun Tokugawa Ieyasu in 1615. There is not much text included, since the history was publicly well known and required no further explanation. The topics in Kawaraban news bulletins became more varied and versatile during the 1660s. Further, the number of circulation grew fast. When a publisher got wind of a promising story, he ordered the writer to report it and engaged an artist to design the illustration. Illustrated newsprints were in high demand and sold better than the ones without a picture. The production method follows the procedure familiar from ukiyo-e workshops. A freshly painted news sheet was pasted on a block of wood and then carved for printing. Work was often done in haste in order to get the product to the market quickly. The paper chosen for Kawaraban was usually thin quality, which saved material costs of the production. Economizing lowered the printing result. Uneven brush marks and other visual irregularities are common in the final prints. Sometimes ink also smudges letters in the text part. Passionate and often tragically ending kabuki plays were popular entertainment in the theater. Romance and stage, together with the amorous scandals about the leading actors, started a fashion craze of double suicides. They, in turn, were the breaking news in the printed bulletins. Because such stories seemed to increase the number of copycat suicides, the government banned publishing of such incidents as a precaution. News about the government itself and its actions were published with utmost caution, as it always required an official inspection and permit. The appearance of the Kawaraban prints became finer towards the beginning of the 19th century. Some simple colors were added to the black and white bulletins to boost the sales. Besides human tragedies and disasters, news also contained a fair amount of journalistic imagination. Encounters with ghosts or other peculiar creatures were a certain sellout. These stories could include registered sightings of fish with a human face, strange lights hovering over mountains, as well as meetings with goblins or fantastic monsters. Similarly, whales stranded ashore and exotic foreign animals like camels and peacocks displayed at a fair excited the citizens. Veracity of the details was not considered an issue. The arrival of the black ships of Commodore Perry at Edo Bay in June 1853 offered huge amounts of unprecedented material for the writers and artists. Perry and his boats were depicted in careful detail in black and white Kawaraban bulletins, maps, and also in multicolored Nishikie woodblock prints. There seemed to be an endless demand for these prints, since many citizens outside the capital did not have an opportunity to see the actual boats and the hairy strangers by themselves. The Japanese could not tell the difference between an American, a Frenchman, or an Englishman, but the portraits of these tall foreigners sold in great numbers. The reading public did not mind if the details were a bit hazy as long as the story was good. Japan had been closed to the outside world and influences for several centuries in the Edo period. The odd customs of the foreigners and the important novelty items aroused great curiosity among the people. The opening of the country during the Meiji period revolutionized the life of the Japanese in many ways. The first multicolored woodblock printed Nishikie Shimbun saw the daylight in August 1874. It was called the Tokyo Nichi-Nichi Shimbun. Its main illustrator was Ochiai Yoshiku, who had studied under the renowned ukiyo-e master Utakawa Kuniyoshi. Nishikie Shimbun prints were always executed in cooperation with highly skilled mokuhanga craftsmen and painters. The production process followed the same method as making of ukiyo-e prints. It started with carving of the key block, Sumiban, which contained the full news text and the outlines of the image. The kyogo sheets were then printed from the key block with Sumi. They were crucial to the color separation. When adding the color areas, the ingenious Gento registration method enabled even the smallest parts of the picture to be printed accurately. The success and popularity of Tokyo Nichi-Nichi Shimbun led to the founding of another important Nishikie news bulletin, namely the Yubin Hochi Shimbun. The chief illustrator, Tsukioka Yoshitoshi, was another talented artist trained in the Kuniyoshi school. The news items for the Nishikie Shimbun were carefully chosen from various sources around the country. The sales were increased by adding simplified onyomi script beside the more complicated set of Japanese characters. Hence the stories became readable to audiences with less than good literacy. At the same time, the boom of publishing Nishikie Shimbun spread rapidly outside Tokyo. Particularly the fast-developing city of Osaka became a center for production for the multicolored newsprints. The Osaka bulletins imitated the outlook of their famous Tokyo predecessors, but their size, as well as their price, was only a half of them. The news items were usually local, although some more interesting popular stories were borrowed from Tokyo bulletins as well. Nishikie Shimbun prints were published irregularly, usually once or twice a month. Writing and illustrating an article was teamwork and took a minimum of 5 days to accomplish. Sometimes the time between two publications of a same story was as far apart as 2 years. Research on Nishikie Shimbun can be confusing since the numbering of the bulletins sometimes is mixed. Several printing projects took place simultaneously at any given time. Thus, the same issue numbers can occasionally be found in two different stories. Woodblock news bulletins usually had a circulation from 200 up to a maximum 800 copies. Western printing technology and papermaking machinery took over Japan at the beginning of the 1900s and rapidly replaced the traditional woodblock news sheets. Today, the old Kawaraban and Nishikie Shimbun prints are appreciated among collectors for their historical value and peculiar insights into Japanese culture. My research on this subject is based on literary sources and a vast collection of Nishikie Shimbun and Kawaraban prints, which were exhibited in the Helsinki Newspaper Museum during spring 2021. Thank you for listening.